They say silence is strength, but what if silence is the only shield you have? My name is Jennifer, and after signing my divorce papers in a quiet office far from the chaos of family expectations, I thought I was finally free. Free to rebuild, free to breathe. But I made one crucial mistake. I underestimated the greed that wears a familiar face. One apartment to live in, one apartment to hide. That was the plan. A peaceful arrangement until the knock came loud, theatrical, and dressed in legal threats. From my own mother. If you've ever trusted your family to respect your choices and found out they'd rather tear you apart for property, you're going to want to hear this. Let me take you back to the day it all began. I always believed that quiet was the reward for surviving noise. So when the divorce papers were finally stamped, and Thomas and I shook hands like colleagues rather than the once married strangers we'd become, I felt nothing. Not grief, not relief, just a soft, stunned quiet, as if my heart had put itself on mute. I moved that same week, alone, without a moving truck, and without telling anyone except the lawyer. The apartment I chose was the smaller of the two we'd agreed on in the settlement. Tucked on the second floor of a leafy, modest building in Silverbrook, the kind of place where no one asks questions, and every neighbor minds their own mailbox. Perfect. The second apartment, the larger one downtown with the panoramic windows and Art Deco bones, I didn't tell a soul about. Not my mother, not my brother, not even my best friend Lacey. It wasn't deceitful, it was protective. That place was my insurance policy against future drama, a sanctuary waiting in case this one got invaded. And I knew, deep down, invasion was inevitable. Because my family has a way of seeing stability as a resource to drain, the silence I built around my new life was intentional. My days were structured. Work, grocery store, evening walks with earbuds. I didn't host. I didn't share. I didn't post photos online. If solitude had a syllabus, I was top of the class. But even silence can't soundproof you from betrayal. It started with a voicemail. My mother's voice, booming, indignant, and dramatically full of legal terminology she barely understood. Jennifer, call me back immediately. I've spoken with a lawyer. Family assets are meant to be shared. Your brother has a right to housing too, and you sitting on multiple properties isn't right. I listened to it 3 times, then deleted it without flinching. She hadn't called to ask, she had called to claim. And somewhere beneath her righteous tone was a barely hidden question. How much can I get if I make enough noise? I didn't call her back. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my new kitchen with my untouched coffee and stared out the window at the rust-red maple leaves, wondering how long it would take before this house of quiet I'd built started cracking from the outside. Because one thing about greedy people, they don't knock once, they bring backup. And my mother was just getting started. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of quiet morning I'd started to cherish. Oatmeal simmering, Billie Holiday crooning from the speakers, and sunlight pouring through my modest second-floor window like forgiveness. I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard the knock. Not just a knock, a siege. 3 rapid pounds, pause, then another 3. Familiar, urgent, uninvited. I froze. No one knew where I lived. No one was supposed to. But when I peeked through the peephole, there she was. Hair lacquered, lipstick too sharp for morning, wearing the look she always wore to PTA meetings and ambushes. And standing beside her, a man in a gray suit. I opened the door a crack. "Jennifer," my mother said without even a hello, "this is Anthony Colburn. He's our attorney." Our attorney, not her attorney. That plural wasn't a mistake. "May we come in?" she asked, already pushing past me. Anthony gave me an apologetic shrug as he followed her in like a human briefcase. I didn't move to stop them. That's my problem. I'm better at absorbing shock than delivering it. She glanced around with the air of a landlord appraising her investment. "So, this is where you've been hiding." "It's not hiding, it's living." Semantics? I wanted to scream. Instead, I calmly poured myself a glass of water, letting them sit on the couch I hadn't even broken in yet. Anthony cleared his throat. "Ms. Lennox, Jennifer, your mother has asked me to help initiate a claim regarding the division of family assets. My divorce is finalized," I said a little too quickly. "All property was awarded legally." "That's not what this is about," my mother interjected. "It's about fairness. You got 2 apartments, Jennifer. 2. While your brother lives in that roach trap walk-up in Westgate. She said it like it was my fault the paint peeled in Charlie's kitchen, like I had personally driven the rats in myself. I didn't ask for 2 apartments, I said. They were part of the spousal compensation, and your brother is your blood, she snapped. You think keeping secrets is going to make you safer? You think stashing apartments away makes you smarter? That hit me like a dart to the chest. She knew, or at least suspected. I stayed very still. I'm not discussing this. You will, she said, rising to her feet, or you'll be discussing it in court. Anthony, give her the papers. The man in the suit pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on my coffee table like it was a bomb with a ticking clock. I didn't touch it. Consider this a notice of intention, he said softly, as if apologizing on behalf of her fury. We're not filing yet. There's still time for resolution. My mother's eyes narrowed. Be reasonable, Jennifer. Give your brother 1 unit, or at the very least, let him live in it. Why hoard what you don't need? Because I know what happens when I give an inch. Because I know what temporary means in this family. It means forever, until the locks change, or I lose everything. But I said none of that. Instead, I smiled. Calm, practiced, dangerous. I'll consider your request, I said. Now if you'll excuse me, I have laundry to fold. Her jaw clenched. This isn't over, I know. They left. The door closed, and only then did I feel my knees give out beneath me. I sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the envelope, not opening it, not yet, because something told me this wasn't just about real estate, this was about control, and I had finally taken mine back. I've learned that when people want to manipulate you, they count on 2 things, your silence and your guilt. So I gave them both. But this time, I added one more tool, absence. 2 days after the ambush in my living room, I told my mother I had the flu, something contagious, inconvenient, and perfectly timed to delay further discussion. She didn't believe me. She never did when I claimed vulnerability, but she knew better than to show up again unannounced. Not yet. While she paraded righteous indignation around the rest of the family, I curled up on my couch in sweatpants, not with a fever, but with strategy. I stared at my phone for a full hour before I made the call. Thomas, the last person I thought I'd meet again. We hadn't spoken since the final signatures. Not because we hated each other, no slammed doors, no screaming fights, but because that was our pattern. Quiet disintegration, a slow crumbling of us, until we weren't worth rebuilding. Still, he was the one person who'd understand the legal weight of what was being thrown at me. Because he hadn't just been my husband, he was a senior partner at Laramie, Graves, and Thorne, one of the most respected corporate law firms in the city. And when he wanted to be cold, Thomas was sub-zero strategic. I took a deep breath and called his office line. Thomas Lennox, he answered, crisp and clinical. It's me, I said. Jennifer. A pause. Not surprised, not warm, just calculating silence. Hello, Jennifer. I need your advice, or at least your insight. Legal advice? Family drama, with legal paperwork attached. He sighed. Not impatient, not indulgent, just tired. Do you have representation? Not yet. You should. There was a softness in that last sentence, barely perceptible, like he knew what was coming before I even explained it. I didn't want to drag anyone in. I thought keeping everything private would protect me. He was quiet again, and for a moment I remembered the way he used to look at me after closing arguments. Sharp eyes that had already anticipated the jury's decision. Eyes that read people like headlines. I take it your mother found out about the second property, he said. I blinked. You always were a few moves ahead. I was married to you, Jennifer. I know how you protect things that matter. That stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I gave him the short version. The knock at the door, the lawyer in my living room, the envelope I still hadn't opened. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, detached. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He didn't ask how I was coping. All he said was, "Don't give them anything." I wasn't planning to. Then don't call me again, unless it's gone litigious. I don't do family court. You know that. I wasn't asking for that. I snapped, more defensive than I meant to be. Then what were you asking for, Jennifer? Silence. I didn't know. Permission? Backup? A sliver of the man who used to stand between me and the chaos? I guess I just thought you'd care, I said finally. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was lower, cooler. Caring and getting involved aren't the same thing. And with that, he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. Thomas had always been clear. He fought battles for money, not emotion. He didn't do messy. And I was knee-deep in messy now. But I also knew something else. He had listened, closely, carefully. And if it did turn litigious, he'd be watching. Maybe not for me, but certainly for the game. Charlie hates birthdays. Has since he turned 10 and found out the magician my parents hired was really just Uncle Dwight with a fake mustache and a stutter. Ever since then, he's avoided the whole ritual. No cake, no candles, no fuss. So when my mother insisted on hosting a dinner for his 35th, complete with just family and store-bought tiramisu, I knew something was off. I went anyway. Adaptive silence. My lifelong strategy. Show up. Smile politely, say little, reveal less. It was held at her house, the same house I grew up in, the one that still smelled like lemon floor polish and tightly wound expectations. Charlie was already there, slouched at the table like he'd rather be anywhere else. My mother flitted between the kitchen and dining room, wearing too much perfume and her I'm the victim voice like it was a corsage. "Jennifer," she said brightly, kissing the air near my cheek. "Glad you could come, sweetie." I didn't answer, just handed over the bottle of wine I'd brought as a peace offering to a war. One never declared. Dinner was strained, polite in that forced, suffocating way, where every smile is a survival tactic. Charlie picked at his food. My Aunt Claudia kept asking about those lovely apartments I'd won in the divorce, each time with more interest than tact. And then, dessert. While my mother was in the kitchen getting the tiramisu, her purse, huge, leather, overstuffed, sat open on the bench beside her chair. I don't know why I looked. Maybe I was already suspicious. Maybe I was just tired of pretending not to be hunted. But there it was, cream-colored legal drafts, typed, stapled, branded with the name of Anthony Colburn's law firm at the bottom. My name in the heading. Petition for claim. Emotional distress and unjust enrichment. I felt the room fade into background noise. Unjust enrichment. That's the phrase they use when someone receives a benefit they allegedly don't deserve. It's what you say when you want something you never earned, but feel entitled to. I reached into her bag and slid the top page just enough to read the rest. The narrative was laughable. My brother had suffered housing instability due to the unequal distribution of familial assets, and I had willfully hidden additional real estate that should be shared in good faith. Emotional distress. A man who drinks craft beer in a robe until noon and can't hold a job for more than 6 months was now apparently emotionally distressed by my rightfully awarded property. I quietly slipped the page back. My hands were ice. The kitchen door swung open. My mother re-entered, holding the plastic container like it was homemade gold. "Who wants dessert?" I smiled. "Actually, I should go. Not feeling great." "Still that flu?" she asked too innocently. "Still," I said, grabbing my coat. Charlie looked up, maybe sensing something shift. "Thanks for coming," he mumbled. But I didn't look at him, because that would have hurt more. Once outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I stood on the porch, trembling, not with fear, but fury. They weren't just coming for what I had. They were rewriting the story to make it look like I was the thief. But if they thought I'd roll over quietly, they hadn't been paying attention. I had spent a lifetime adapting to silence. But now, it was their turn to listen. 3 days passed after the birthday dinner. 3 days of pretending I hadn't seen my name scrawled across a legal draft in my mother's purse. 3 days of silent calculations, what to say, how to respond, and whether it was better to wait for their first move or make my own. I chose neither. I waited for something else entirely. It came late afternoon on a Thursday, right as I was returning from the market with a paper bag full of apples and eggs. A silver Lexus was parked halfway into the curb outside my apartment building. Clean, corporate, idling. The woman who stepped out looked no older than 30. Sleek ponytail, tailored coat, and a leather satchel so sharp it might have cut glass. She didn't look like a friend. She looked like a delivery system. "Jennifer Lennox?" she asked, her voice clipped but not unkind. Yes. She handed me a manila folder and a small envelope. From Mr. Lennox. I raised an eyebrow. Thomas? She nodded once. He asked me to deliver these in person. Before I could ask anything else, she turned and walked briskly back to the car, disappearing like fog in sunlight. I stood frozen on the front steps for a full minute before finally going inside. The envelope was sealed with a gold-embossed Laramie, Graves and Thorn logo. No note. No explanation. Inside the folder, property records. The complete file from our divorce, including the deed transfers, settlement terms, and signed agreements with his firm's watermark on every page. My name, in bold, was listed as sole and irrevocable beneficiary of both properties. There was even a notarized clause highlighting that the second apartment was awarded explicitly for compensatory purposes, a detail Thomas had insisted on, back when we were still pretending to like each other. I'd argued it was excessive. He'd said, "It's protection." I hadn't understood what he meant then. Now I did. At the very back of the folder was a brief typed memo. No signature, no pleasantries. Just 9 words. "You're covered. Don't contact me unless it escalates." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thomas wasn't taking sides, but he was watching. And quietly, in the shadows of paperwork and warnings, he had given me something more powerful than support, a signal. They might make noise, they might try to shame me, pressure me, twist reality, until it bent into their version. But on paper, I was untouchable. For now. The question was, what would they do when they realized illegal theft wouldn't be as easy as emotional manipulation? That night, I left the folder on my desk. Open. Visible. Like a talisman. Because even though Thomas hadn't picked up the sword, he had laid it at my feet. The letter came on a Friday. Official envelope. County seal. My full name printed in stark black ink. No middle initial, no fluff. Just a quiet, brutal formality that made my stomach sink before I even opened it. Notice of temporary injunction. Filed by my mother's attorney, on behalf of the aggrieved party, meaning my brother, though I knew his fingerprints weren't on this. Not really. This was her game. He was just the pawn with her last name. I read it 3 times, hoping each pass would soften the meaning. It didn't. Until the claim was resolved, I was legally barred from renting, selling, or transferring ownership of either apartment. In other words, my independence was frozen. My assets, frozen. My ability to breathe without asking permission from the same woman who once screamed at me for hiding birthday money in my sock drawer, frozen. There was no knock this time. No shouting. Just a quiet weapon slipped through the mail slot like a curse. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter crumpling slightly in my grip. The walls felt smaller. The apartment, mine supposedly, felt suddenly borrowed. I thought about calling Thomas, about waving the injunction in his face and daring him to keep pretending this wasn't a real war now. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe spite, maybe the memory of his voice, cold and transactional. Don't call unless it turns litigious. Well, guess what? We're there. But instead of dialing him, I picked up my phone and searched for someone else. Lacey, my oldest friend, the only person who'd stuck by me through both heartbreak and paperwork. I hadn't told her everything. Not yet. But maybe that's what this war was teaching me. Silence might be a strategy, but not a shelter. When she picked up, I couldn't speak at first. "Jen?" she asked gently. "Are you okay?" I exhaled. "I just got a court order. I can't touch either of the properties." There was a beat of silence. Then, "What do you mean, can't?" "I mean, my mother's filed an emotional distress claim, and until a judge says otherwise, I'm not allowed to rent, sell, or even renovate the places. They're effectively locked, but they're yours." "I know. This is insane." "I know." The words echoed in my mouth like ash. Lacey didn't tell me it would be okay. She didn't lie. She just said, "We fight this. Together." That word, "we," hit harder than the injunction. Because my whole life, the battles had been me versus the noise. Me versus expectation. Me versus their twisted versions of loyalty. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to stay that way. The next morning, I sat at my desk with the Thomas folder on the left, the injunction letter on the right. and a blank notebook in front of me. And for the first time since the divorce, I didn't feel like a woman running. I felt like a woman preparing. They'd paused my life, but I still owned the story. And I was just getting to the good part. It started with a post. A blurry photo of me at a coffee shop, taken from across the street. The caption read, "Some people have no shame. Living off divorce settlements while their own brother sleeps on a couch. Family means nothing to some. No names, just implication. But anyone who knew my mother's circle would know exactly who they meant." By the end of the day, it had 67 shares and a comment thread that read like a character assassination in slow motion. "Must be nice to kick family when they're down. She was always cold. Surprised it took this long. This is what happens when you marry for money." I scrolled in stunned silence, heart thudding like a metronome stuck on dread. The next photo was of my downtown apartment building. Different angle, same malicious intent. They weren't just attacking me, they were drawing maps. That weekend, my mother hosted a family and friends summer barbecue, code for a public tribunal where my name was the unspoken headline. I didn't want to go, but I showed up anyway. Sometimes you don't attend for peace. You attend to witness the war they think they're winning. The backyard was packed. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors I used to ride bikes with. Everyone clustered around cheap folding chairs and beer coolers, pretending the potato salad could mask the tension. My mother greeted me with a hug full of thorns. "Jennifer, darling, so glad you could make it. I wasn't aware it was an intervention," I replied. She smiled without heat. "It's a celebration. Charlie's been through so much." I glanced at my brother, sitting with a beer in hand and a new sympathy beard he hadn't earned. He waved, sheepishly, not because he regretted any of it, but because even he wasn't used to the spotlight being this hot. Then it began. The whispers, the side glances, the not-so-subtle nudges as people accidentally mentioned the lawsuit near me. "She must feel terrible about what's happening. So much stress for the family. I hear she hid the second property. Isn't that wild? She should just give Charlie a place. What's one apartment when you have two?" It didn't take long before someone cracked. Aunt Marla, 3 drinks in and never known for discretion, cornered me by the grill. "I just want to say," she slurred slightly, "what you're doing is really disappointing. Your brother has always supported you." I blinked. "When?" She frowned. "Well, emotionally, you know. He's family. Family doesn't draft lawsuits behind your back." Marla scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. It's just property. You can't take it with you." I smiled. "No, but dignity? That travels light." She walked off in a huff. By the time dessert was served, I had been accused, without anyone saying the words, of greed, cruelty, and betrayal. My silence was treated as guilt. My legal win repainted as theft. And the worst part? They believed it. They needed to, because if I wasn't the villain, what did that make them? As I was leaving, a neighbor I barely knew, a man named Ron, stopped me near the gate. "Hey, Jennifer," he said, lowering his voice. "Just wanted to say, I've been through something similar. Don't let them gaslight you. Standing your ground doesn't make you the bad guy." I blinked at him. "Why are you the first person to say that tonight?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm the only one who doesn't owe your mother favors." Then he slipped back into the crowd, unnoticed. I drove home with the windows down, letting the night air cleanse what the barbecue had caked on, because they had thrown everything at me. Guilt, gossip, humiliation, and I was still standing. Scraped? Sure, but not broken. And now, I was ready for the next round. I didn't find it because I was looking for it. I found it because I couldn't sleep. 2 days after the barbecue, I was lying awake at 2:47 a.m., replaying every comment, every side-eye, every pointed concern whispered at that grill. I kept hearing Aunt Marla's voice. "It's just property." No, it wasn't. It was my restart button, my right to peace. My compensation for years of quiet tolerance, while Thomas built his career, and I held everything else together. I got up, turned on the lamp, and pulled the divorce binder from my closet shelf. It's spine-worn, edges dog-eared, a monument to the calmest war one ever fought. I hadn't really read it since we signed it. The language was dense, dry, precise, classic Thomas. He never used 3 words when 20 would do, especially if those 20 built a legal fortress. And on page 43, buried under a heading about property and asset division, there it was. The awarded properties, herein referred to as primary spousal compensatory assets, shall be deemed irrevocable in title, exempt from future third-party claims, and non-transferable under duress or familial pressure. I stared at the phrase, familial pressure. That wasn't just legal jargon. That was Thomas. That was him knowing, preparing. I read it again, and again, until my eyes blurred. He hadn't just protected me from Thomas, the cold strategist. He'd protected me from my own blood. Maybe not out of love, maybe just out of knowing who I was surrounded by. I took out a pen and underlined it. Then I copied the clause onto a fresh sheet and tucked it into the front of the folder from his assistant. Next, I emailed a local family attorney Lacey had recommended, attached the clause, the injunction, and a 2-sentence summary that said, in essence, they're bluffing. Let's stop playing defense. That afternoon, I called the courthouse. The clerk confirmed a hearing had not yet been scheduled, but the injunction was active until further review. I said, I'd like to file a motion to lift it. Do you have new documentation? Yes, I said, feeling the heat return to my spine, and a very specific clause they missed. It was the first time I felt the shift, not in the law, not in the facts, but in me. Until that moment, I'd been responding, absorbing. Now, I was building a case. Lacey came over that evening with takeout and her laptop. You look different, she said, handing me a fork. I feel different. What changed? I held up the copied clause like a holy relic. This, I said. They thought I wouldn't read it. She scanned the page, eyes widening. Wow, he really covered everything, except my peace of mind, I muttered. But I guess that's my job now. That night, I slept. Really slept. Not because the war was over, but because, for once, I was holding the sharpest sword in the room. I never expected to hear from him again. Not directly, not personally. But when my phone buzzed at 9:13 a.m. with a contact I hadn't seen in months, Thomas Lennox, work, I felt that familiar chill slide down my spine. I answered, voice taut. Jennifer, good morning, he said, the words clean and clipped as ever. I need 10 minutes of your time, privately. It wasn't a request. I looked at the clock, then stepped into my bedroom and shut the door. What is this about? He didn't bother with pleasantries. Your brother's girlfriend. Her name is Avery Lane, correct? Yes. Did you know she works for Dinalo and Hartman? I blinked. That's a law firm. One of ours, he clarified. Or rather, our rivals. And, as of last month, a direct competitor in a bid for a state-level housing litigation contract. The pieces didn't fall into place, so much as crash like glass. I sank onto the bed. Wait, are you saying she helped draft the lawsuit against me? That's what it looks like. Her signature isn't on the draft, but we traced edits in the digital document. Her ID is embedded in the metadata. You're telling me this? Why? I asked carefully. He paused. Because that clause you found? It's airtight. And now it looks like someone's trying to make a mess where a rival firm benefits. The implication hit hard. This wasn't just family betrayal anymore. This was professional sabotage disguised as family distress. I assume you're not calling just to inform me? I said. No, he replied. And for the first time, his voice dipped. Calm, calculating, but with a spark of something sharper. I'm taking the case. Personally? I blinked. You said you didn't do family court. I don't. But this isn't about family anymore. It's about integrity. And I don't like when my name ends up anywhere near fabricated claims. There it was. Not affection, not nostalgia. Pride. Thomas had a brand to protect, and they dented it by making this public. Won't this be messy for you? I asked, representing your ex-wife against her brother. He almost chuckled. Only if anyone can prove it's personal. And trust me, it's not. I should have been offended. Instead, I was relieved. This wasn't about redemption or reunion. It was about firepower. You'll be hearing from my paralegal, he said. We'll file a countermotion by end of week. Don't speak to your family until then. I nodded. Okay, Jennifer? Yeah? You were smart to hide that second apartment. I hung up without responding, but my heart beat louder than it had in weeks. Because for the first time since this mess began, I wasn't the only one on my side. I had a lawyer now. A ruthless, emotionally untethered, ex-husband kind of lawyer. And if Avery Lane thought she could stitch together a lawsuit using my bloodline and her boyfriend's laziness as thread, she was about to watch it unravel. I hadn't been inside a courtroom since my divorce hearing. Even then, it had been quiet, procedural. 2 lawyers reading from documents, 2 former spouses staring ahead like strangers sharing an elevator. But this was different. This was theater. And Thomas? He wasn't just directing. He was starring. The courtroom was modest. Cream walls, dark wood benches, a judge with reading glasses, and the patience of someone who'd seen too many family feuds masquerading as justice. I sat on the plaintiff's side, arms folded tightly in my lap, flanked by Thomas's junior associate, and a tall file box labeled simply J. Lennox, Protected Assets. On the other side, my mother, upright and proud, as though her son's fabricated hardship was a noble crusade. Charlie looked miserable in his suit, collar too tight, eyes flicking everywhere but toward me, and beside him, Avery Lane, the woman behind the paperwork. Petite, confident, legal pad in hand, her expression unreadable, until Thomas stood. "My client," he began, his voice cool as marble, "has endured 6 months of character assassination, a public smear campaign, and a legally baseless injunction, all under the guise of familial concern." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Lennox, we're here for cross-examination, not closing arguments." "Of course," he said smoothly. "Then let's start with Ms. Lane." Avery walked to the stand like she was immune to consequence, but Thomas didn't rush. He laid the foundation slowly. Her employment at Dinello and Hartman, her work in paralegal research, her access to document drafting software used in property litigation. Then he dropped the question. "Ms. Lane, did you draft or assist in the creation of the document labeled Plaintiff Exhibit A?" Her mouth tightened. "No? Are you aware that the digital file of Exhibit A contains metadata tags identifying the initials AL linked to your employee login?" She hesitated. "I may have reviewed it." "Reviewed it?" Thomas echoed. "So your initials, timestamps, and IP address on the draft are coincidental?" She shifted in the chair. "I was helping Charles. As a girlfriend. Not professionally." "Helping how?" "Proofreading. Formatting." "Are you a licensed attorney?" "No." "Then explain this clause." He tapped the screen on the courtroom monitor where a paragraph from the draft glowed. The judge leaned in. So did I. Because I'd seen that paragraph before, not in any communication from my family, but in a Dinello and Hartman legal blog published last year. It was lifted, word for word. Avery's face lost color. "That's a standard phrasing," she offered weakly. "From your firm's proprietary brief guide?" Thomas said, raising an eyebrow. The judge frowned. "Miss Lane, did you use your employer's resources to draft a legal claim for a private family matter?" "I was trying to help," she said, now visibly nervous. "For free? Or was this part of some reciprocal arrangement?" Thomas asked. "You and your boyfriend fabricate distress, file a claim, and if it works, you both benefit?" My mother sat frozen, hands clutching the armrest. Charlie stared at his shoes. And I exhaled, because this was the moment, not of revenge, but of truth cracking through performance. Thomas turned to the judge. "We have records, Your Honor. Logins, edits, even Avery Lane's internal memo recommending this strategy to a junior partner. Unrelated to this case, but damning in implication." The judge adjusted her glasses. "I'll review the materials. But I will say, this changes the character of the claim entirely." Avery's voice cracked as she muttered something to her attorney. The hearing adjourned with no ruling that day, but everyone knew the outcome was now a formality. They had tried to bury me in legal fiction, but it was their story that unraveled under oath. And for the first time, my silence wasn't my shield. It was the sound of their narrative collapsing. The ruling came a week later. I didn't dress for victory. No power suit, no dramatic heels. Just gray slacks, a soft blue blouse, and the necklace I bought myself the day after my divorce. A quiet symbol. A reminder. Thomas arrived precisely 5 minutes before the hearing, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. No greeting. No nod. Just a quiet presence at my side that felt oddly reliable. The judge didn't waste time. This court finds insufficient evidence to support the claims of emotional distress and unjust enrichment. Furthermore, the participation of a non-attorney in the drafting and strategizing of legal documents has undermined the integrity of the claim. She turned to my mother, then to Charlie. This case should never have reached my docket. She paused. The temporary injunction is lifted immediately. All ownership rights are restored. Ms. Lennox, your properties remain fully yours, without contest. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. The kind of breath you forget you've been holding for 6 months. Beside me, Thomas gently closed his folder. We're done here, he said, rising. But I wasn't quite. As I turned to leave the courtroom, my eyes found my mother's. Cold. Humiliated. And, underneath it all, still unyielding. Charlie wouldn't meet my gaze. His girlfriend, Avery, was notably absent, her reputation likely undergoing emergency resuscitation somewhere in her firm's HR department. Outside, I stood on the courthouse steps and let the sun hit my face. Thomas joined me silently. You could have walked away, I said. I almost did. Why didn't you? He slipped his sunglasses on. Because you were right. I wrote the clause. I knew what your family was capable of. Letting them win would have been like erasing my own signature. I nodded. Still, thank you. He looked at me then. Really looked. Don't mistake professionalism for affection. I don't. He paused. But also, don't mistake absence for apathy. That was Thomas, always leaving a breadcrumb of something that felt like care, even if he'd never admit it out loud. We didn't hug, we didn't make promises. We simply nodded, like two people who had survived the same storm, but reached different shores. That night, I walked through both of my apartments, slowly, touching walls, opening windows, reclaiming space that had never been anyone else's to take. I didn't celebrate. But I did something better. I slept, deeply, with the windows open and the folder of court documents filed away, no longer needed as armor. Weeks passed. The family went quiet. There were no apologies, no olive branches, only absence. And for once, I welcomed it. My mother retreated into her neighborhood gossip chain. Charlie found a new apartment, funded by a quiet loan from an uncle too polite to confront the truth. Avery, last I heard, was on probationary leave and likely rewriting her career plans one LinkedIn update at a time. Thomas? He went back to his skyscraper life. Occasionally, I'd see a news blurb about a major case he'd won. I'd nod and move on. I didn't need him anymore. But I would always remember that when it counted, he'd done the one thing no one else had. He believed me, on paper, in court, and under oath. I never wanted revenge, just peace. And now, finally, it was mine. Thank you for joining Jennifer's journey. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own battles, please share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, boundaries aren't just lines, they're lifelines. What would you have done if your own family tried to take what you'd built? Let's talk below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of strength, survival, and starting over.